Today we're making a longtime reader and family favorite recipe for the best gluten-free banana bread. This recipe has been carefully tested and perfected to create a gluten-free banana bread with an amazing crumb and texture. It's soft and moist without being mushy and makes delicious thick slices like you'd find in a coffee shop or bakery. So let's get started. Start by preheating your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. To make this banana bread, you'll need a loaf pan. You can either use a light metal loaf pan or a glass loaf pan. I prefer using an 8.5 by 4.5 light metal pan for baking gluten-free quick breads. The light metal pan conducts heat well, which helps the banana bread to cook evenly. The fact that this pan is just slightly smaller than a 9 by 5 pan also helps to create a gluten-free loaf with a nice tall domed top. But I've successfully made this banana bread in a 9 by 5 glass pan many times and it turns out great. So use whatever pan you have on hand. Lightly grease the loaf pan with cooking spray. For this recipe, we're using gluten-free 1-to-1 baking flour. This flour is also known as gluten-free measure-for-measure flour. Gluten-free measure-for-measure flour is typically made of a blend of gluten-free flours and starches, plus a binder like xanthan gum. This mixture of ingredients is meant to closely recreate the results you'd get when baking with traditional wheat flour. In addition to gluten-free measure-for-measure flour, we will be using blanched almond flour. Almond flour gives gluten-free baked goods a delicious flavor and texture. The higher fat content of the almond flour also aids in browning and moisture retention. To keep this recipe nut-free, you can simply use an additional 1/4 cup of the gluten-free measure-for-measure flour in place of the almond flour. Start by mixing together your dry ingredients. In a medium bowl, add 1 cup of gluten-free measure-for-measure flour, 1/2 cup of almond flour, 1¼ teaspoon baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon baking soda, and 3/4 teaspoon salt. Whisk the dry ingredients until they're evenly combined, then set aside. Next, it's time to mash the bananas. You'll want to use very ripe bananas with dark brown spots for this recipe. This recipe calls for 1 cup of mashed bananas, and I find that that's usually 2 to 3 regular sized bananas. Peel and add the bananas to a medium bowl. Then mash the bananas with a fork until they're totally smooth. It's important to use exactly 1 cup of mashed banana for this recipe for the best consistency. So I recommend measuring out 1 cup of banana once they've been mashed. To make the batter, add 1/3 cup of shortening to a large mixing bowl. I like organic shortening for this recipe, but any shortening will work. Shortening is one of the secret ingredients to the best gluten-free banana bread. It helps create the ideal crumb and texture. Add 2/3 cup of sugar and beat with an electric mixer until light and fluffy, about 2 minutes. Add 2 large eggs, 1 teaspoon vanilla, and 2 tablespoons of milk, and mix for 1 to 2 minutes until light and combined. Add 1/2 of the dry ingredients and mix on low speed to combine. Add half of the mashed bananas and continue mixing. Adding the dry ingredients alternately with the bananas helps the flour to hydrate and absorb the wet ingredients. Add the remaining 1/2 dry ingredients and mix, followed by the rest of the mashed bananas. Scrape down the sides and bottom of the bowl and mix everything together one more time. Now you can add any mix-ins you like. Add up to 1/2 cup chopped walnuts, pecans, blueberries, or chocolate chips. This banana bread is also completely delicious on its own. Pour the batter into the prepared pan. Bake for 50 to 60 minutes or until the loaf is nice and golden and a toothpick inserted into the center of the loaf comes out clean. Cool the banana bread in the pan for 5 to 10 minutes, then gently turn out the loaf onto a cooling rack. Cool the loaf completely to room temperature before slicing. Slice the banana bread and enjoy. This banana bread is delicious, spread with softened butter. To store this gluten-free banana bread, wrap the loaf tightly in plastic wrap and keep it at room temperature for up to 3 days. I hope you enjoy this gluten-free banana bread as much as we do. The full printable recipe is linked in the description below, and be sure to check out meaningfuleats.com for more tested and perfected gluten-free recipes.